I want to discuss a little bit an incident that occurred yesterday at a Labour Party event. Jeremy Corbyn was speaking on what was the UN Human Rights Day. There were a few events going on around this. Anyway, in the middle of his speech, the well-known campaigner Peter Tatchell kind of interrupted with a group of campaigners, and they were holding up signs saying "Sanction Russia" and "Condemn Russian war crimes," signs to that effect. And I suppose you could say it was all good-natured protests. There was no serious sort of disruption. Although one of the contentions was that um, they were targeting the wrong people. That was a contention coming from Corbyn supporters, because in their view, Corbyn has shown pacifism um, and is against bombing. But there's a few problems in their argument. Um, Firstly, Peter Tatchell. Is someone who has a long history of campaigning on a wide range of human rights issues. And I will give credit where credit is due. I believe that Peter Tatchell is consistent. I believe he will target left or right, regardless of the issue. I mean, for example, he has condemned Israel for his views on Israel's approach to the Palestinians. So he's condemned Israel for that, but he also condemned the Palestinians for their treatment of the gay minority there. Peter Tatchell himself is a gay man. So I think he's got quite a solid track record in terms of being consistent. So when Corbyn supporters are calling him an idiot for attacking Jeremy Corbyn, let's look at it for a second. The signs were quite specific about Russia's bombing in Syria. Now, as I record this video, the situation in Aleppo remains a quagmire. It looks like the Syrian government is has the edge, but it's a very, very grim situation. Thousands of people have been killed there this year, just in Aleppo, not including the many thousands killed elsewhere in Syria. Um, John Kerry, Sergei Lavrov have been in back and forth talks that haven't really gotten anywhere. One issue, in my view, is Russia's absolute insistence on keeping Assad in power. Um, the Western perspective seems to be that the majority of Syrians don't want Assad in power. And this is one of the main lies, actually, that is spread around about Syria, this idea that all Syrians want Assad. Firstly, the people who say that clearly don't know how a dictatorship works. Um, it is ruled by fear. And that's not to say that those Syrians want an Islamist alternative, but are we getting into a situation where we basically say, okay, for Arab people, it's a choice between Islamist thugs or a dictator thug. What sort of choice is that? The most plausible, the most real situation is that most Syrians don't want either. It is true there will be Syrians living in regime held strongholds that probably support Assad. Some of them will genuinely support Assad because they will think he is the best option. But many others have no choice. The fact of the matter is, in the early stages of the war, and people conveniently forget this, Assad's secret police, the Shabiha, were rounding people up and torturing them, anyone perceived to disagree with Assad. And Russia has shamelessly promoted the propaganda of the Assad regime by promoting the lie that any Syrian who is against Assad must be a terrorist. All men and women and children. So I get so sick and tired of seeing idiotic comments online like, oh, Assad is just a guy defending his country from terrorists, and Russia is coming to save the day. Russia is helping Assad save the country from terrorists. Um, I think what really has happened is the Islamists infiltrated the situation, not helped by China and Russia when they decided to block a UN resolution condemning Assad's use of force. It was the Assad regime that started this war when it decided to brutally crush legitimate protests. And they were not protests by hardcore Islamists. They were protests by ordinary Syrians tired of corruption, tired of human rights abuses, and tired of high unemployment. The same sort of bread and butter issues that were going on across the Arab world at that time. It's just that in Syria it turned into absolute full scale war. And the fact that Russia and to a lesser extent China absolutely want to keep the Assad regime in power at all costs. Doesn't matter how many people died. That's the only thing they care about. Um, so Russia will point to situations like, "Oh, look at what we done in Palmyra. We're the liberators," but people completely ignore the fact that they've been arming a regime that has used chemical weapons on its own people. I know some people say that Islamist factions may have done that, but independent research found it was all likelihood the Syrian government done that. This is a brutal regime that has probably killed more Syrian civilians than ISIS has. And ISIS is a disgusting, vile, thuggish organization. No question about it. But everyone knows that. The problem with the Assad regime is a lot of people, a lot of idiots, useful idiots as far as I'm concerned, think that Assad is a good guy, defending his country from terrorists. He helped to create the terrorists by creating the situation that they could come into. Also, when people come out and say, oh, the West created ISIS, um, I'm not saying there isn't culpability there, but I do think people should put a bit more meat to that argument. Um, you can throw out all sorts of things online and not have the responsibility of having to explain it. And I just think it just pisses me off when people want to blame all the world's problems on the West. That's not to say the West hasn't been culpable. I mean, I still feel our coziness with Saudi Arabia goes too far. I mean, I made that video about Theresa May and Bahrain, and sometimes we have to think about trade, but I also think it doesn't. We are too close to Saudi Arabia. I do believe that. Boris Johnson this week has been saying that, and he stood by his position, much to the chagrin of Downing Street. But anyway, back to the Corbyn situation. So Corbyn supporters are saying, "Oh, but he has done this and that." Well, one person said that on the Andrew Marr show, he did say it appears Russia has been guilty of war crimes. But the thing about Jeremy Corbyn and these allegations, firstly, Corbyn supporters always blame the right wing media. Well, look, it's no mystery that the Murdoch press is no fan of the Labour Party. But they were doing exactly the same thing to Ed Miliband. They were trying to ridicule Ed Miliband at every single speech he made. They had that ridiculous thing over the sandwich. They had this war of ridicule against Ed Miliband as well. But Ed Miliband didn't have anywhere near the sort of controversies Jeremy Corbyn has. So I think it's a little bit of a void argument to just blame right wing gutter rags, which I'm no fan of. I mean, I am fully aware of the sort of behaviour that the likes of the Sun get up to. They will embellish stories, they will exaggerate things, and they will take things out of context. I think they're a disgrace to journalism. But it's a bit like, ironically, when Donald Trump was complaining about the media, there's no smoke without fire. So, it's no good just blaming the media and saying that they are responsible for all the bad reputation Jeremy Corbyn has. I've followed Jeremy Corbyn on his own page, okay? I've been looking at the Labour Party page. I've been looking at his speeches, his videos. I'm not getting the sources from right wing gutter rags. And I believe Corbyn would be a terrible prime minister because I think in every situation, you can guarantee that Jeremy Corbyn will play the devil's advocate for whoever is in opposition to the British government. So he's taken his role as leader of the opposition to a new level of opposing everything. And that is not effective. Okay, the role of a leader of the opposition is to oppose the government. That's essential for democracy. And there's certain areas, by the way, I actually agree with Jeremy Corbyn on. For instance, I think he is the only major party leader in recent years to say anything in a big way about, I mean, Miliband touched on it, but Jeremy Corbyn has been forthright on welfare issues, and for that I give him credit. I repeat to any Corbyn supporters watching this, I give Jeremy Corbyn credit for that. He deserves credit for that because it is a very important issue. But I simply cannot align myself to his worldview, which in my view is reactionary and hard left. It is always about playing the devil's advocate for whoever is on the other side. I mean, they say he kind of acknowledged Russian bombing, but probably only because Andrew Marr put him on the spot to do so. Jeremy Corbyn would never have mentioned that. had Andrew Marr, who's one of the best journalists around, questioned him about it. It's the same as the whole anti-Semitism argument within Labour. How did Jeremy Corbyn initially respond? We condemn all racism, and making a very safe and cosy answer. The same with terrorism. We condemn terrorism. We condemn violence. And you see, the thing is, when your party is being accused of something specific, it's no good just making a generic condemnation of whatever that issue is, because that's a very, very safe answer. It's the easiest thing in the world to say, oh, we condemn terrorism and violence. But if someone is saying, for example, when you have a shadow chancellor who has a track record of supporting the IRA, at least in words, then these are very serious matters. And personally, I would rather have the situation, okay, that's people say things they regret, let's move on. I honestly would rather have that situation. But the reason these things keep being brought up again is A, because Jeremy Corbyn and his party keep saying things that strike out. I say his party, I should say the Corbyn faction. Um, they say things that makes you think twice and think, did he really say that? A few weeks ago, Corbyn praised Fidel Castro. Now, I had a Corbyn supporter send me a private nasty message to my Facebook page, and she tried to claim that, oh, but that's protocol. You have to say that when someone dies. No, you don't. When someone prominent dies, you can be honest about them. Jeremy Corbyn could have given a balanced answer. He could have praised Castro whilst also acknowledging the human rights abuses. He made several public speeches on that. Only one of them did he grudgingly admit there was some human rights issues. So whenever Jeremy Corbyn does say anything about human rights of left-wing regimes or anyone he's ideologically sympathetic to, it's only through gritted teeth, only because there's been pressure on him to do so. So I think, in short, the protest was justified because, by the way, Jeremy Corbyn's a member of the Stop the War Coalition, an extremely dubious organisation who call themselves pacifist. But actually, if you look at their track record, again, anything they have said about Russia has been very passive and on the sidelines. They're complete and utter hypocrites as far as I'm concerned. They're just useful idiots for Vladimir Putin and Bashar Assad. And this is the way the hard left think. It's a world outlook. British and American government are evil and they're responsible for all the world's problems, and therefore anyone opposing them must be the good guys. That is a black and white way that Corbynites see the world, and I'm sick of it. Um, because actually they're turning Labour into the new Nazi party with their behaviour and antics, threatening MPs who disagree with Jeremy Corbyn, for example. And, I'm not talking about name calling, I am talking about actual threats. People having their office windows put in. There is a threat from neo-nationalism in this country. We've seen that with the Joe Cox situation. But I believe there is also a threat from the hard left. And, we have to be vigilant. I'm not suggesting they're about to commit a terrorist attack. Certainly not. But there is a very nasty underbelly in the Labour Party, and a lot of them support Jeremy Corbyn. Am I saying that Jeremy Corbyn is personally responsible? No. But this is something that has obviously happened since his election. It's irrefutable. Because in the Labour Party right now, there's a very strong atmosphere of, okay, I get the argument, he's the elected leader and people should support him. I do understand that argument. But rather than being a broad church, the Labour Party in his tenure has become a deeply intolerant um, platform for, frankly, communist infiltrators. I really do believe a lot of them are communists. I've been to the Durham Miners Gala. There are people there openly waving flags of Stalin. Do you imagine if the Conservatives were associated with forums and events and groups that showed sympathy for hard right leaders like Hitler or Mussolini? There would be an absolute outcry when Tory councillors have been caught wearing silly Nazi costumes. They've been fired. And yet the number of, frankly, communists that have, in my opinion, infiltrated the Labour Party is troubling. Jeremy Corbyn says there's been no entryism. He says the support is legitimate. But the question is, what direction does this go in? I give Jeremy Corbyn credit where credit is due. He has shown compassion on the welfare issue, and someone has to. And history will record that. I give Jeremy Corbyn thanks because I've been through the system and it is awful. I give Jeremy Corbyn thanks for that. But I just can't align to his worldview that the West is to blame for everything, which pretty much is the view of Corbynites. I cannot align with that. Anyway, I'll round this up. So yeah, in short, the gist of the criticism coming from Corbyn supporters was that they were targeting the wrong people. But Jeremy Corbyn has been far too silent on Russia. Saying one thing in one show just because he put on the spot to do so, it really doesn't show anything. I think Jeremy Corbyn only says these things when he's put on the spot to do so. Ideologically, it's pretty obvious where Mr. Corbyn's sympathies lie. And I think the man is a hypocrite. He talks about pacifism and human rights. He praises a dictator like Castro, not making any attempt to get any sort of reasonable balance. Okay? Even if he is ideologically, a supporter of Castro, can he not grasp that there are Cuban exiles in Miami who fled the regime? I mean, this is what I find insufferable about hard left thinking, the utter hypocrisy of it. And sure, there's hypocrisy on the right as well. I mean, Theresa May should be put on the spot over Saudi Arabia, and she should be criticised just as much as Jeremy Corbyn for her support of that regime. But I am so sick and tired of people, and many of them are Corbyn supporters, coming out with such utter crap when it comes to Syria about Russia being the good guys and, oh, we should cozy up to Russia. The irony of this is Russia is behaving like an imperialist power. And these are the very people who would vilify and, say how awful the British Empire was. And yet, Russia, if you look at its recent behavior, it's been totally imperialistic. So the irony doesn't escape. And that's it. That's how I see the behavior of Corbyn supporters. I'm not saying I hate Jeremy Corbyn, okay? I'm not saying I disagree with him on everything. But I do think his track record, when he talks about human rights and pacifism, it's inconsistent because he turns a blind eye, or at least underplays the role that very powerful actors like Russia play in the world. And ironically, this is something that the hard left and the hard right have in common. You can find the same sort of attitude coming from Trump supporters. There isn't much difference, actually.